Well, we are very fortunate tonight to have Miss McCulloh, who was a longtime teacher, not just here at James Buchanan, but much longer up at Annville, Cleona. And even though she was an English teacher, she really has focused her retirement on local history. And she is our expert on all things local Mercersburg history. And we are just always thrilled when she is able to present a topic to us. And tonight her topic is a look at the struggle for the right of women to vote with emphasis upon suffrage activities in Mercersburg. And I am going to just have a little aside. I think if Joanne had been around at the time of the suffrage movement, she would have been out there marching.
Probably. And I'd probably be joined by a lot of people in this room.
Especially the female population of this room.
The following short article appeared in the Mercersburg Journal in the November 28, 1913 issue, entitled, "There You Have It." The article states, Miss Hall, the suffragist, opened her address in Chambersburg last week by saying she thought it was most unfair when women asked for the vote that anyone should say, "Prove that you're fit to vote." The only people to whom the vote is denied are children, lunatics, and criminals. It is denied to children because their sense has not been developed, to lunatics because they have lost their sense, to imbeciles because they never had any sense, and to criminals because they've made the wrong use of their sense. And with the present state of affairs, women are classed with the above. Now, this struggle for recognition of women's place in society was a long time in coming. In 1792 in England, Mary Wollstonecraft wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women, a document then considered not just controversial, but inflammatory. She, of course, was vilified. Nevertheless, her writing was a seminal point in the long struggle. But there were voices on this side, the Atlantic also. And one of them was Abigail Adams. When her husband was at the Second Continental Congress in 1776, she wrote him a letter. She said, "I long to hear that you have declared an independency," meaning independent country. "And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. That your sex are naturally tyrannical is a truth so sterilely established as to admit no dispute." So there were voices on both sides of the Atlantic. In this country, most of the early agitators for women's rights were made by abolitionists, most of the early workers for women's recognition in society were abolitionists. In the late 1600s, the Quakers around Philadelphia wrote and spoke against slavery. And one of their people, much later, in the 1800s, Lucretia Mott, became a great leader in the women's movement. She was a Quaker. She wasn't born in Philadelphia. She was born on Nantucket. But she was a great person out of that Quaker tradition. Now, in 1840, Henry Stanton, who was a minister, he was an abolitionist, he was editor of William Lord Garrison's paper, The Liberator, which was an anti-slavery paper, went to London to a World Anti-Slavery Congress. His wife, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, went with him, and 6 of her women friends went along. Well, when they got there, they were most humiliated and angry. They were not permitted to sit on the main floor of the conference. They were relegated to a balcony that had some kind of black cloth around it. When they came home, they began to write to one another, and to write to one another more and more about the condition of women. Now, in July 1848, Lucretia Mott was visiting her sister, who lived in the little town of Waterloo, New York. One of the ladies there had a tea in her honor and invited Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who with her husband Henry was living kind of next door in Seneca Falls, New York. These are kind of twin towns. And at this tea, and a few other ladies were invited, most of them Quakers, they decided they should have a conference about this whole thing. And they went to work. They planned a conference to meet in Seneca Falls 10 days later. They worked amazingly fast. They put ads in the newspapers, and on July 19th and 20th of 1848, they had a convention in a small Wesleyan chapel in Seneca Falls, New York. And the Seneca Falls Convention is kind of considered the official beginning of the women's movement. Now, at that convention, and about 300 people came, including about 50 men. Now, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott were the leaders of the convention, but they were hesitant to chair it. Ladies didn't kind of do that sort of thing. So Lucretia Mott's husband chaired it, but they were the leaders. And at the convention, they adopted what they called a Declaration of Rights. A Declaration of Sentiments, which is a direct parody of the Declaration of Independence. Just as Jefferson wrote, all men are created equal, the women wrote, all men and women are created equal. And just as Jefferson listed at the end of the Declaration of Independence, 13 statements, representing the 13 colonies, of everything King George had done against the colonies, they listed. I won't read all of them, I'll read some of them. Man, but talking about man, he has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. He has made her, if married in the eyes of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right in property, even to the wages she earns. He has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. He has endeavored in every way he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life. And they ended by saying, we shall employ agents, circulate tracts, petition the state and national legislators, and endeavor to enlist the pulpit and the press on our behalf. Now, this statement caught the attention of a lot of people. And it was also reflective of the statements of the Anti-Slavery Society. The Anti-Slavery Society was also using Jefferson's Declaration of Independence as a template for its thoughts. The women began to have an annual conference, and they were, as you would anticipate in the beginning, all in New York State. And one of the people who became interested in that was Susan B. Anthony, who lived in Rochester, New York. Now, Susan B. Anthony was from a family that was very sympathetic to the abolitionist cause. One of her brothers was a farmer in Kansas, and this was the time at which Kansas was in turmoil between the pro-slavery and the anti-slavery people. Remember, one time Kansas had two capitals, a pro-slavery capital and an anti-slavery capital. So her brother, Daniel, obviously knew all about this. And so with the anti-slavery thinking and with the pro-woman thinking, of course, Susan B. Anthony was attracted to that. Later, a couple of the annual conferences were in New York State and one in Philadelphia. And by 1869, they formed the National Woman's Suffrage Association. Now the question was, what would they do next? Did they want to go state by state and try to convince the state legislators, or did they want or have a state constitution amendment, or did they want a national amendment? What would they do about their anti-slavery work? Should they continue that with their work for women? Should they concentrate on one or the other? So there were a lot of unanswered questions here at the very beginning. When independent women think independently, so you would know there would be discussion and disagreements. And so an offshoot of the National Woman's Suffrage Association was the American Woman Suffrage Association. Now, they had the same goal, but they went about their work differently. And at the end of the 19th century, in 1890, they joined forces and became the National American Woman Suffrage Association. And it is this group that carried the heavy load from then until the very beginning. Now, they didn't want to be called suffragettes because the suffragettes in England had resorted to violence. So they chose the term suffragists. Now, in 1912, under the leadership of Alice Paul, the National Woman's Party was formed. Now, when we think of the suffrage movement, this is the group we think of. Woodrow Wilson was an opponent of women's suffrage, and therefore, this group is the group that picketed the White House. This is the group that had the parade the day in Washington, the day before Wilson's inauguration. He and his administration were totally opposed to woman suffrage. After all, he had been born in Stanton, Virginia, had lived in Georgia. His second wife was from southwestern Virginia, and his feelings did not lie with the suffrage movement. But this is the group we think of, and these are the women who were imprisoned in both Washington, D.C. and in Virginia. And these were the women who were force-fed, and these are the women you read about. But there was a great mass of women in the National American Suffrage Association who really did heavy work. Because we have to remember that only men voted. We sometimes forget that fact when we talk about this. Only men voted, and that meant they had to persuade every legislator individually, and that's heavy work. Now, there were other groups involved. One was the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU, and its focus was on the family. And its focus was alcohol abuse ruins a family. Therefore, the WCTU worked in conjunction with the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Another group that was well-financed and well-organized that was against women's suffrage was the liquor interest. And in every state, the liquor interest worked hard to defeat women's suffrage. And that's a fact that we cannot get around. They had bought senators, they bought legislators, they had a lot of influence, and they were well organized. Now, the first suffrage meeting, I'm saying this wrong. The first suffrage meeting in Pennsylvania was very early, but the same year that the National American Women's Suffrage Association was formed, the Pennsylvania Woman Suffrage Association was formed. It had headquarters first in Harrisburg, in Philadelphia, but they soon realized that they needed to be not in Philadelphia, but in Harrisburg. And so they moved to Harrisburg. Now, in the beginning, these suffrage groups used speeches, pamphlets, flyers, rhymes. Here's a typical rhyme. It's a parody upon Coming Through the Rye. If a lassie wants the ballot to help the run of the town, and a lassie gets the ballot, need a laddie frown? Many a laddie has the ballot, not so bright as I, and many a laddie votes his ballot, overcome with rye. If a lassie works for wages, toiling all the day, and her work the laddie's equals, give her equal pay. These suffragists also reminded people that in the West, when Wyoming became a territory, and that was 1869, the same date as the founding of these organizations, women were given a vote. Women could vote in Wyoming from the time it was established as a territory. And the next year, people in Utah, now this is a Mormon state. Mormon women could vote. And oddly, and I think tragically enough, when the Congress outlawed bigamy, the women in Utah lost their vote. But the women here in the East reminded people these states here in the West are territories. Women can vote there. And they had a wonderful cartoon of a map of the United States, a woman striding across the map, and Wyoming and Utah are in bright lights, and it's all black here in the East. But they also learned that they got a whole lot more attention if they met outdoors. And from an early time on, 1912, 1913, they had more and more activities outdoors. And of course, by this time, people had cars, or some people had some cars, so people could go and hear them. They could go and hear them. And so, on Saturday, May 15th, a Mrs. Bintz, this is from the Journal, from Philadelphia, accompanied by A.B. Hess, superintendent of schools in Chambersburg. Mrs. Hess and other ladies came to Mercersburg. In town hall at 8 o'clock in the evening, Mrs. Bintz spoke after having been introduced by Mr. Hess, who made an impressive address recommending equal rights for women and stated that there were many educational advantages to be derived from women's suffrage. Mrs. Bintz had a lengthy address setting forth the many advantages to be derived from the woman's vote and made an earnest appeal to the voters. Now, in 1915, in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, there were proposed amendments to the Constitution of each state. Now, the elections weren't on the same day, but they were all in the fall of 1915. So, the local group got busy. In town, the local group elected Mrs. J.C. Rankin as chair. Mr. Rankin, her husband, was a local attorney. If you know Janet Varden Hallbaker, this is her grandmother. Mrs. Carrie North was vice chair. Mrs. H.C. Caldwell was secretary. She, I think, is the youngest of the group. She was a recent graduate of Wilson College, and she was the wife of the minister of this church, Reverend Caldwell. Mrs. H.H. Spangler was treasurer. Her husband was a lawyer. And Mrs. J.A. Phillips was literary chair. That is Phillips of Phillips Seeds. And the literary chair would be the one to give the pamphlets and the flyers and all that sort of thing. The Journal says they agreed to meet at the home of Mrs. Rankin the following afternoon. Now, later that year, this is on September, Mrs. Binns again spoke at 8 o'clock this time at 8 o'clock in the evening, and she spoke in the square, outdoors. She spoke, according to the Journal, to a large group of men and women. According to the Journal, the meeting to be held that evening had been announced only at noon on that day. But despite the late notice, the band was prepared and played several selections for, quote, the president of the association brought the speaker of the evening in her handsome automobile into the square. That's Mrs. Rankin. Mrs. North and Dr. James C. Rose, minister of the local Presbyterian church, accompanied the speaker. Mrs. Binns spoke for over an hour, and according to the Journal, she was, and I quote, thoroughly posted on her subject, and there was a marked interest manifested in her address by the large audience. The newspaper said that judging by the large attendance, the sentiment now expressed, voters in Mercersburg would approve the proposed amendment to the Constitution. But it didn't happen that way. Now, this is 1915, and there was this proposed amendment to the Constitution. A very wealthy lady from the Philadelphia area commissioned what became known as the Justice Bell. Now, the Justice Bell is an exact replica of the Liberty Bell. The only difference is it says establish justice. They put the bell on a truck. They had to reinforce the truck. It was founded at the Manili Bell Foundries in Troy, New York. It weighed 2,000 pounds. They put it on a truck. They put a sign on the back of the truck that said, "Vote for Women." Her husband drove the truck, and they started up in northern Pennsylvania on the 4th of July. They ended in Philadelphia the night before the election, the election. They used the bed of the truck, of course, as a platform for speakers. It went to every one of the 67 counties in Pennsylvania. And you may want to look at this more carefully later. Here it is in Mercersburg. The way they did it, they really understood how to use outdoor activities. They had a delegation, it came from McConnellsburg, so they had a delegation go to the county line, and then the next county group would have a delegation. So a group met them up at the top of the mountain. They got to the other end of town. They had a parade. I'll read the Journal's account of it. The band, of course, was in the parade. 2 marshals on horseback, Frank Long, who was a local barber, and Seth Steiger, if you know Tom, was his grandfather, on horseback. Mrs. Rankin rode in a lovely car, decorated car. Reverend Caldwell from this church drove the car, and here it is. You see her husband, this is a square, her husband is the driver. There, of course, is the bell. This is before the square was paved. And there were like yellow brick crosswalks here. You can see the yellow bricks here. And I'd like you to look at this more carefully a little bit later this evening. And I'd love to know who this little boy was. And back here is a dear little child. And they're all dressed in white. It was a festive day. The ladies in McConnellsburg, according to Fulton County News, had given them lunch before they got here. They were a little late getting here because Governor Brumball was in Fulton County too, and there seemed to be a bit of conflict of their whatever. Now they had the clapper of the bell attached to the bell, I don't know how, and they said that it would not be loosed until women got the vote. Some people urged the women to, quote, let their bell boom out in its proclamation of political liberty now, just as the old bell did in 1776. But the women refused to do that. Now, this is what the Mercersburg Journal said about it. The women speakers will explain the message and ask the help of the men of the town to unfasten the chains which hold the great brass tongue of the bell silent. The men's help is needed because the chains are not to be removed from the bell until the women of Pennsylvania are granted the right to vote. It is within the men's power to say just when that day shall be. The paper had stated that Miss Mary Bakewell would be the prime speaker. Now, Miss Mary Bakewell is a very interesting person. She was one of the founders of the Allegheny County Equal Rights Association. Now, this group developed what came to be known as the Pittsburgh Plan. And people in other states adopted the Pittsburgh Plan. It was both educational and political. In the Pittsburgh Plan, they taught ladies how to speak publicly. They also taught them how to lobby legislators. And then they divided the geographical area of their work into precincts, just the way political bosses did or do. They were highly effective. Now, another of the founders of that Pittsburgh group was Hannah Patterson. Hannah Patterson graduated from Wilson College. And if you drive out Philadelphia Avenue today, on the edge of the Wilson campus, between the President's House and the Iron Gates, there's a marker to Hannah Patterson. It's gray with like a pink trim. So that's Miss Bakewell. Now, Miss Bakewell had been here before. In 1914, she had spoken about suffrage at a meeting of the Women's Club, which is now the Women's Club. And during her time here, she had stayed at Hotel Mercer, James Buchanan Pub, as the club's minute reflect a vote of thanks to Charles McLaughlin, who owned it. And the minutes of the Women's Club say Miss Bakewell gave a most interesting address on suffrage, which all enjoyed exceedingly. Now, from the journal, this is the description. The bell was late in reaching Mercersburg. The party had been detained at McConnellsburg by Governor Brumball, and his party who were passing over the Lincoln Way. However, at about 4 o'clock, the party was met out at the Pike, up here, by representatives of the town in automobiles. The line was formed at the toll gate. The procession was led by Frank Long and Seth Steiger as marshals on horseback, followed by the Mercersburg Band, Burgess Maurer, we didn't have mayors then, we had Burgesses, members of town council, and editor of the Mercersburg Journal. Mrs. Rankin's car was handsomely decorated, and it carried the local committee. Reverend H.C. Caldwell came along. The circle in the center of the public square, in the beginning, they kept the circle there, and it was decorated with green vines, flags, and yellow flowers and bunting. Yellow is kind of a color of the suffrage movement. It made a pretty appearance. Now, they said Miss Bakewell was coming, but Dr. Mary Wolfe made 2 addresses in the square. The first one, while waiting for the truck carrying the bell to arrive. Not in the history of the square has it at any time been so crowded with people. Men, women, and children from town and country were anxious to see the bell and were attentive. Dr. Mary Wolfe is from Lewisburg and is the finance member of the state committee of the Pennsylvania Women's Suffrage Association. She's a woman of fine appearance, logical in her addresses, and won votes for women here in Mercersburg. And so then the truck with the bell went off to Greencastle and Waynesboro. Now, at the next meeting of the Women's Club, which was the day after the bell, the members passed a motion for cleaning the square, which is a good thing. Now, the Mercersburg Journal said, by the votes of men, women's suffrage was defeated in New Jersey last week on Tuesday. What will Pennsylvania do? Well, the next week, Journal said, votes for women. 104 men voted for the amendment. 145 men voted against the amendment. Now, in Pennsylvania, and this is probably due in large part to the Pittsburgh Plan, Western Pennsylvania and Northern Pennsylvania voted for the amendment. Philadelphia and the southern tier counties voted against the amendment. In Franklin County, 2,958 men voted for it, 3,498 men voted against it. And in the state, it lost by 55,000 votes. Now, unfortunately, women in Pennsylvania had to wait until the passing of the 19th Amendment. Now, this national amendment, and as these women worked through the years, more and more they realized they would have to have a national amendment for the United States Constitution. Going state by state and trying to explain to each individual. And now this national amendment had been proposed early, but it had lain in Congress for 40 years. And finally, after much work, and the women lobbied. They had rules for their lobbying. Don't argue. Don't let them upset you. Be friends with the secretary. They had a list of practical ways for these women to lobby the senators and the representatives. And finally, on June 10th, 1919, what became the 19th Amendment was passed. 39 words. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. 39 words. And it took all those years. Now the work began. The amendment was passed. Now it had to be ratified. It had to be ratified by 36 states. And they knew that states in the Deep South would not ratify it. So therefore, they had to concentrate on the others. I believe Wisconsin was the first state to ratify. Pennsylvania was the 7th state to ratify. These early ones, of course, were easy. Then there were the difficult ones. And it got down to there were 2 states left that they thought would ratify, North Carolina and Tennessee. And then they gave up on North Carolina. They thought they could not win North Carolina. The last hope was Tennessee. And this is, if you want to read an interesting book, I'd like you to read Woman's Hour by Elaine Weiss. This was a major battle. The legislature did everything possible to delay, defeat, obfuscate, whatever verb you want to use, even the voting on it. The liquor interests were very strong here. And we forget that these women's anti-slavery suffrage groups were well organized. When we talk about women's suffrage, we forget that a lot of women didn't want it. And they organized against it. This Tennessee battle was intense, it was protracted, and finally it got around to a vote. And when the vote was tallied, it was a tie. 48 voted for ratification, 48 voted against it. So after much political maneuvering, they had a second ballot, and one man changed his vote. So it became 49-48. Women's suffrage is a close-run thing. Now, the next step is these women had to be registered, and there were only 9 weeks between certification of the ratification and the fall election. And that fall was a presidential election between the Republican Warren Harding and the Democrat James Cox. So they had 9 weeks to work. Now, as we know, elections are a state function. In Pennsylvania, the county commissioners appointed for each polling place a registrar assessor, 2 words, a registrar assessor. In Mercersburg, the registrar assessor was John Wilson. I don't know anything about him. Since Montgomery Township had 4 polling places, the commissioners appointed Jerry Smith, James Pike, E.S. Cadle, and J.A. Hornbaker. Peters Township had 4 polling places: David Beatty, Frank Appleby, Ray Zimmerman, and George Daly. Warren Township had 1 polling place, and J.E. McCulloh was the registration assessor. Now, let me read to you from the Franklin Repository, which was the Chambersburg newspaper. The headline was, "County Commissioners Take Steps to Register the Women Voters for Coming Presidential Election." Quote, "Women of Franklin County, 22 years of age and older, can be assessed by the registration assessor of the county beginning as soon as the books are distributed tomorrow, which will enable them to register and vote at the coming presidential election in November." The county commissioners had set 2 days for registration, August 31st and September 1. That was a Tuesday and a Wednesday. The paper went on to say, women could register in 2 ways. First, any husband or father can present the names of the feminine folk of the family and pay their county tax, but no other man will be permitted to present names. Secondly, women may register by addressing a letter with a request to their registration assessor. Mail-in ballots, girls. or by filling out an enrollment blank and mailing it. The newspaper also said there was a 20-cent tax to vote, and the voters had to pay that local tax before October 1. And if they did not pay it by that time, they could not vote. There was a reminder that if a woman did not vote, her tax would not be returned. And then the newspaper said, and I think this is rather slighting, the plans adopted are simple, and any woman who desires to vote can easily register. So we're not quite bright enough to do it all. My question about this, and I don't understand it, it doesn't say a woman can just walk in on her own 2 feet and register. Now, I don't know if they couldn't, but it's, well, you've heard what it says. So that part, I don't understand. And of course, since 1946, it's been illegal to tax anybody for voting. Now, the Mercersburg paper, by now Mr. Fleming has been deceased. We owe a lot to George Fleming in this town. He was editor of this newspaper, and he was always for something good. And like the establishment of the first library in town. And everything that's good like that, he had on the front page, and frequently on the middle of the front page. I think we owe George Fleming a lot. And unfortunately, he did not live to see women get the vote. Now, the Mercersburg American Journal had an article in the middle of the page, and with black around it. Are you registered? The last day to register so you can vote at the November election is Wednesday, September 1st. Bear this in mind. The assessors will sit at the polling places, and if your name is not on the voting list, anyway, have it placed thereon. And then the journal says, if the passage of the woman's suffrage amendment by Tennessee is not rescinded, the women will have to get their names on the registration list. There were legal challenges to the ratification of the amendment, and this is what the journal is talking about. So, in November 1920, there was a presidential election, but here in town, the school board, of which Harry Byron was the president, wanted to build a new high school. This is the high school that served this town from 1921 to 54, I guess. And so what did the school board do? It very astutely went to the Women's Club. There was going to be a mass meeting of town people to discuss this bond issue, and obviously the school board wanted the community to pass it, and so they had a mass meeting and asked the Women's Club to encourage women to attend the meeting and, of course, to vote for it. So the Women's Club got itself busy, and Mrs. Herman spoke of the great need of the proposed school and the unsanitary conditions. Mrs. North spoke of the satisfaction of being able for the first time to take part personally in this election. The president, now the president of the Women's Club at this point was Miss Bradley. That's Miss Ella Bradley, who taught history in the high school. My mother was one of her students. My mother quoted Miss Bradley all of her life. The president announced that through the kindness of Mr. Wilson, that's the registrar assessor, sample ballots had been secured. After the ballots had been distributed, the president explained the advantages of the Australian ballot. Now, the Australian ballot is the kind of ballot we have, printed at government expense by the government with the names of all the candidates on it. But until the end of the 19th century in this country, each political party had its own ballots, already filled out, of course, with their candidates. And sometimes they were color-coded. In other words, they were of different colors. Well, when you went to the polls, you picked up the ballot from whichever party you wanted. Well, obviously everybody knew how everybody else voted. And you read about all these ruckuses in 19th century elections. Well, no wonder. Everybody knew what you picked up. And this is called the Australian ballot because it was used first in Australia. At any rate, then the president read an article stating that assistance in voting can be given only for actual physical disability and described the actual method of voting. Well, the school board and the women were very successful because here in town, 456 people voted for the new school and only 31 voted against it, which I think is rather wonderful. They've done their work well. So the Mercersburg Journal included this: a husband's confession. Yesterday, Miranda voted, but so far I haven't noted that she sprouted any whiskers or dropped the trouserettes. And she hasn't indicated, since she got emancipated, that she means to start out raiding with a bunch of suffragettes. Took her half an hour to do it, and as soon as she was through it, she came hustling home without a stop to scrub the pantry door. Cooked the dinner, did some baking, trimmed the dress that she was making, mended socks, and got the ironing, all done by 4:30. She appears to be as able to keep victuals on the table and to keep the moths from feeding on my go-to-meeting coat, just as handy with the baby, or a little more so maybe, as she was before they told her woman ought to have the vote. Far as I've observed, she's just as fond of candy and as keen to read the fashions in the daily household hits as before she was equal, and however strange the sequel, I'm just a trifle prouder of Miranda ever since. But not everything had changed. The National Women's Suffrage Association, even before the ratification, established the League of Women Voters to keep going, and the League of Women Voters is still an active organization. So they changed their name, but the purpose is still the same. Anyway, I've rattled on here a long time. But I would like you to see the picture. This is my favorite Mercersburg picture.
Did your mother ever tell you what it was like when she voted the first time?
I didn't hear you, Sue.
Did your mother, because she was my teacher, and this is why I'm asking, your mother, did she ever say what it was like when she voted for the first time?
No, she didn't. But my grandmothers were opposites. My mother's mother, Mrs. Garland, my grandmother Garland, voted the first time, drove a car, was active in the WCTU. And by the way, the WCTU in Mercersburg was founded in this room. Wow. I can't find the year yet. I've read it, but I don't know where that piece of paper is. She did all sorts of things. My grandmother McCulloh would have thought voting would be unseemly. I'm sure. I never heard her talk about it, and I don't think that would have been just not a ladylike thing to do. But Grandma Garland was out doing it all. If she could. Okay.
Like your granddaughter.
Two things are also interesting related to Methodism. The Methodist building in Washington, D.C., which is right across the street from the Supreme Court, was built to lobby for temperance.
Oh, good.
And to this day, it is used by the United Methodist Church to make its voice heard in Washington, D.C., joined by Presbyterians, United Church of Christ, and Seventh-day Adventists in that building. So
Thank you, Ron.
Methodism leads the way in many respects.
Thank you.